Okay, so welcome everybody from to Portugal and to Canada. So welcome to our great Globeducate debate. My name is Juan Crouch and I am the Director of Education of Globeducate. And one of the best things I get to do in my role is to connect students together so that you can share and show off the brilliance that you are, the skills that you have, and the talents that you have, so that we can all just learn from each other as well. We're in this enviable position where we have such a great network to connect with, and so let's really utilize that. We started the Globeducate debate last year as part of lockdown, actually, to connect, and we received so much positive feedback from it. And to be honest, I was so impressed with the caliber of students in terms of their presentation, in terms of their debating skills, that I knew I needed to make sure that this was an annual event. And this is what we've done. We've made sure that it becomes a part of our Globeducate event because it aligns so much and so well with our Globeducate mission and Globeducate agenda. Last year, we had 8 schools participate. This year, we have 21 schools participating. So I have got 40 debates all week. I've had about 5 already to go, and I'm not tired because I'm just keep continuing to be inspired and motivated and enthused by the caliber of our students here. So I'm going to pause now, and I would like to introduce you to Miguel from Nobel Algarve, who will be our chairperson for this debate and who will facilitate it further on. So I'll give you the floor, Miguel.
Hi, well, yeah, as you said, my name is Miguel and I'm here from Nobel Algarve. So good morning, delegates. As I said, I am Miguel, I am from year 10 and I am from Nobel Algarve here in Portugal. I am really pleased to be your chairperson for this day and event. Can I start off by welcoming everyone to this important global educate debate, as you've once stated. The main issue today is just to enjoy and sharing our views of this important subject. I know that everyone will be respectful of everyone else's opinions and ideas. Although this is a competition, the more important issues are that we enjoy speaking and answering the questions and feel confident that we have done our best. There are 3 time limits. The first and second speaker will speak for only 3 minutes, while the last 2 speakers from both teams get 4, if they so wish. Please don't worry if your speech does not last 3 whole minutes or 4. Just enjoy it and do your best. Our debate today will involve everyone speaking in turn, starting first with the affirmative side, then which is us from Nobel Algarve, then the opposing side, the people from Blyth, Burlington. The final speaker in each side can answer points which have been made by the other side. Okay, everyone, let's get started. Our motion today is fairy tales affect children's perception of reality. Can I introduce our first speaker of the motion, Francisco from Nobel Algarve?
Hello, my name is Francisco Martins, and today myself, along with my teammates, Sahar and Olivia, we are going to debate the motion pertaining fairy tales, changing children's perceptions on reality. We as a team indeed believe that children's realities are affected by fairy tales. When I speak about fairy tales, I'm merely referring to the fairy tales in Western society. For example, how many fairy tales start off with the idea of the princess being saved by the prince? Doesn't that seem a little misogynistic? Many children, like myself, read these fairy tales and enchanting stories growing up. They made me see things in a very particular way. Because we don't really realize it, but fairy tales build this foundation of learning. But is it the right type of foundation? Well, based on the Jungian interpretation, fairy tales teach children on how to deal with basic human conflicts, desires, and even relationships in a healthy way. The way we acquire these skills can seriously impact a children's health, quality of life, and also influence the values and beliefs. That can be quite dangerous because many children are affected by fairy tales because they make them believe unconditional happy endings. This is not the case in the real world, as we all know. To face the truth, about 8 million children per year are kidnapped from their homes, and around 1 billion are used for sexual purposes. This is the world that we live in. What would you do if you were a 7-year-old child and were found in a lost, dark alleyway? Would you run, or would you do what many tales have taught you and stay for Prince Charming and fight? Well, a lot of children will grow up and struggle with the fact that life is like in a Harry Potter movie, where the world is a perfect place, even in a dark alley. The sad truth is that these fairy tales affect your judgment. As a child, there is no clear perception of reality, which is why it's so dangerous for a child to be alone. In the real world, fairy tales do not exist, unfortunately. When I was younger, I was introduced to all types of tales, which I believed without any questions asked, like all of us did. For example, leaving my teeth under my pillow for the tooth fairy and waiting for a present or even pocket money. Although these are all good tales, they lie to our children as we grow up. And they input negative ideas of the reality, which leads to these children, to our children, being severely affected. Thank you.
Where's my paper? Francisco stole my paper. All right, thank you, Francisco from Nobel Algarve. I would like to introduce the first speaker from Blyth, Burlington, Ria.
Yeah, Ria, thank you. So I was dreaming before this debate, and I woke up and I realized that the dragons and princesses in my dream were not in my room. That was when I realized that fairy tales do not affect my perception of reality. We as a team believe that fairy tales do not affect children's perception of reality. Our first point is about privilege. Privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Children that are privileged enough to have the easy access to fairy tales, what assumption-wise, also have access to an adult of sounder mind with more of an ability to separate fiction from reality to voice this difference to the child. The next point is about different age groups. It can be argued that different ages of children have different ways of separating fiction from reality. Children that are ages 0 to 4 are too young to even understand what fairy tales are talking about. Their brains are not developed enough to understand what they are seeing, so the fact that they are seeing princesses or dragons has no effect on them. Ages that are 7 to 17 are already too old to even think that these stories could be based off of real life. They've already made the distinction between fiction and reality. Children aged 5 to 6 have very vivid imaginations. So one could potentially argue that children of these ages do have their perception of reality affected and altered, but not by fairy tales. It would be by their own imaginations. One cannot prove that these imaginations are based on fairy tales that a child may have seen, and one cannot provide relevant proof that this child has even seen or read a fairy tale in their life. Imagination stems from brain development, whereas fairy tales stem from fiction. This proves that imaginations cannot be affected by fairy tales. Another point to consider is ratio. The amount of time that students are exposed to fairy tales versus the amount of time exposed to reality. Let's say a child spends a day at school, learning things about their world and the way reality works, and then they come home and watch or read a fairy tale. The fairy tale would have no effect on them, as they would have already had a grasp of reality as opposed to the fairy tale. According to Screen Rant and HowLongToRead.com, the average watch time of a fairy tale, movie, or TV show is from 1 hour to 1 hour and 45 minutes, and the average read time of a fairy tale is only 16 minutes, versus the 23 other hours of the day spent at school, communicating with elders, and at home, not watching or reading a fairy tale. The ratio between these two things provides the reasonable assumption that fairy tales would not affect children's perceptions of reality. These are just a few reasons as to why we believe that fairy tales do not affect children's perception of reality. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ria from Burlington. I would like to introduce Sahar here from Nobel Algarve.
Miguel, while we're waiting, I'm sorry, it's Blyth. It's Blyth, not Blyth. So Blyth Academy, so Blyth Burlington. I'm sorry I didn't say it earlier.
Sorry, we did correct it, but we forgot in the process.
All right.
Can I start?
Mhm.
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Sar, and I'm here gonna present how morality is linked to fairy tales and how that is linked to fairy tales changing children's perceptions of reality. So, what is morality? Is it making sure that your homework has been done on time? Is it remembering to be polite to your elders? Or perhaps going to bed when your parents tell you to? Let's look how this relates to fairy tales. Now, let me ask all of you a question, but don't answer, just think. If you don't act good, who will give you call on Christmas Eve? Well, if your first thought was Santa Claus, that just shows how ingrained your mind is by fairy tales. And if your adult mind is so wrapped by fairy tales, imagine what a child's brain looks like. Let's look at more examples. Let's travel around the world to Russia. Dead Moros, or Father Frost, is the Slavic version of Santa Claus, which became the symbol of Russia's winters and New Year's. This just shows that fairy tales change all around the world and impact children's moralities in many different ways. Bluebird is a fairy tale made in France. This French fairy tale tells the story of a rich Frenchman who murders his wives and the escape and the attempts of escape of one of his wives. The moral of the story is that curiosity only causes problems. Now, as you can all understand, this just shows this is a very bad lesson to children because it teaches them to never be curious, even if it's for a good cause. Once, when I was young, I saw Frozen on my DVD, and for a whole week I thought I had ice powers. As you can all understand, this was not true. And I felt heartbroken when I realized I didn't have ice powers, and for a very long time, I didn't watch any fairy tales. How would you feel if you were lied to by a story, betrayed by your very own beliefs? Now I've grown since and no longer believe in fairy tales, but millions of trillions of people all around the world still believe in fairy tales, even after growing. This is very bad. This just shows that, like my teammate Francisco said, fairy tales change our forms of reality and creates a better but false one. Prince Charming once said, "Life is not a fairy tale. If you lose your shoe at midnight, you're simply drunk." But like Hans Christian Andersen once said, life itself is the most wonderful fairy tale. Now, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to rebuttal on what Ria said. So, hello, Ria. I really liked your speech. But at the very start, at the very beginning, you said that today, before the debate, you dreamed about dragons, woke up, and realized dragons aren't real because they aren't in your room. But this just shows that if you realize that they aren't real today, that means fairy tales change your perceptions of reality until today, which just helps the fact that fairy tales change our forms of reality. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sahar from Nobel Algarve. I would like to introduce the second speaker from Blyth, Burlington, Camilla.
Thank you. It could be argued that children frequently make up their own imaginary scenarios while growing up. These scenarios have no link to fairy tales, as they are typically created due to loneliness or lack of family connections, like imaginary friends. These scenarios are created to fill in gaps missing from the child's life and have no correlation to fairy tales. A growing frontal cortex, which is located in the front of the brain, causes these imaginary scenarios to ensure a child's creative growth. When thinking of fiction world versus the real world, children do not have the brain capacity to connect one world to the other, or carry ideas and expectations from one to other. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, once said that fantasy is made out of the primary world, but a good craftsman loves his material and has a knowledge and feeling for clay, stone, and wood, which only the art of making can give. This quote is just one of many explanations that help prove our point, that states that there is a fiction world and a reality world. Since it is another world, it has no connection to our reality. With this knowledge, when looking at unrealistic expectations, for example, the children may gain from reality, not including fictional fairy tales, it is made clear that a child cannot carry these expectations from the fairy tale world into the reality world. This means these fairy tales could also not provide any kinds of expectations. According to Gapminder, 27% of the world consists of children. Out of the 27% of children, only 19% of children ages 6 to 11 read classic fairy tales. One could argue that orphans don't have an adult of sound mind present to explain the differences between real and fake, and that this alone would cause a child's reality to be affected. However, orphans, when compared to children who aren't orphans, have already experienced much more reality than the ones who aren't. Although these orphans may not have access to an adult sound of mind to explain the differences between reality and fiction, they would not need them, as their expectations of reality are too low to be expected a unicorn to come around the corner. Even with the low expectations or the harsh reality suffered by these children, their brains again would not be developed enough to carry something from fiction over to the reality. Someone said, waiting for the tooth fairy. Those were made by parents, not fairy tales. And if the parents got this tooth fairy idea from fairy tales, well, they are adults, so that is irrelevant. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Camilla. I would like to introduce the last speaker here from Nobel Algarve, Olivia.
Life isn't a fairy tale. That's the harsh reality in 2021. Not every girl is looking for Prince Charming, and not every guy can be the hero. And not everybody in today's world fits into that stereotypical relationship. From a very young age, children are brought up on fairy tales. When asked, many children say that they dream of being a prince or princess. These fairy tales paint a picture for young kids and spark creativity, but they also create extremely high standards. A study was carried out by the University of Bath that examined 6,000 American heterosexual married couples over the course of 15 years. The study was carried out to see how the woman becoming the breadwinner impacted people's physical and mental health. They found that men are less stressed than normal when women partners were contributing 40% to the household income. But when that income starts increasing and the percentage goes up, men become increasingly uncomfortable and stressed. The reason why? Because traditions like fairy tales tell them that the social gender norms suggest that men should be the dominant in relationships. And of course, this can be very traumatic to boys when they can't live up to those expectations. And it also normalizes the female and male relationship and paints a picture whereby any relationship that doesn't fit this norm is unacceptable. The damsel in distress. That's how every main female character in fairy tales is portrayed. Weak and in need of a savior. I mean, you have some strong independent female characters, Maleficent, Cruella de Vil, the evil queen, Mother Gothel, right? But they are all the villains. They're the ones you're told to hate, the ones everyone wants to defeat. Time after time, the main female character is undermined by the main male character by showing they need to be saved. Just like how Prince Charming had to save Cinderella from evil stepsisters and stepmother, and Rapunzel had to be saved from a tower by Flynn, Aurora had to be woken up by a true love's kiss by Prince Philip. Now, from everything we have said, from Francisco talking about how kids tend to believe fantasies a little too much, and Sahar talking about how fairy tales can influence us on a day-to-day life, one could conclude that fairy tales do indeed change our perspective of reality, because life isn't a fairy tale. And as Jack Welch said, face reality as it is, not as it was or as you wish it to be. I need to rebuttal.
Yeah.
And Camilla, what you said on how sometimes children try to fill a void with imaginary friends, those expectations of needing to do that can be formed from watching fairy tales where there's stable relationships between both male and female, with romantic relationships and also family relationships. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Olivia, for the last conducting speech from Nobel Algarve. I would like to introduce the last speaker from Blyth, Burlington now, Brooke.
Thank you. As we said before, we believe that fairy tales do not affect children's perceptions of reality. Just to reiterate, children that are privileged enough to have easy access to fairy tales would also have access to an adult with more of an ability to separate fiction from reality to voice this difference to the child. Children ages 7 to 17 are already too old to think that these stories could be based off of real life, as they have already experienced the quintessential realistic life environment multiple times by the time they reach these ages. And children aged 5 to 6 years old have their own vivid imaginations based on their own developing brain and experiences, which have no correlation to fairy tales. These imaginative scenarios created by the child that have no link to environmental exposure to false fiction or fairy tales can continue to grow and be carried with the child through their development without fairy tale influence. The amount of time that students are exposed to fairy tales versus the amount of time exposed to reality also makes it so children are able to differentiate real from fake or fiction from reality. The time spent on non-fairy tale or fiction-related media would essentially overpower time spent on it, which means that there would not be enough of an exposure to fairy tales, meaning they could not have the power to affect a child's perception of reality. One could potentially argue that fairy tales affect a child's mental, emotional, or physical health, and that these effects could somehow affect said child's perception of reality. However, children's mental health is in no way affected by fairy tales, as the only fictional contributions to children's mental health stems from their imagination and dream sequences, which were earlier proven to have no pre-existing correlation to fairy tales. Children's brains are not developed enough to allow an outside source, such as fiction stories, to affect a child's mental awareness. Physical health is determined by 2 factors only, and those are exercise and eating habits, both of which have no connection to fairy tales. Children's emotions also stem from brain development and growth, and it cannot be proven that these emotions, such as sadness, happiness, or anger, are created or altered by fairy tales. Severity is another point to consider. We do not believe that fairy tales affect children's perception of reality, but if that's what you're implying, allow us to explain why that is a, respectfully, ridiculous assumption. So if you are implying that fairy tales are severe enough and powerful enough to affect a child's reality from their perception, is it not reasonable to say that fairy tales could have as much of an effect on someone as drugs or alcohol might? Let's think about this. Alcohol makes you hallucinate and is meant to warp your reality. And if you are implying that fairy tales do the same thing, does that not mean that children should have to be of legal age, or at least legal substance use age, before being exposed to fairy tales? These are just a few more reasons as to why we believe that fairy tales do not affect children's perceptions of reality. Now, allow me to rebut some of the things said in the previous debate. Misogyny is in fact a problem. I agree with this, but it does not affect the way children see this problem. You also mentioned kidnapping. Well, I'm just wondering, how does kidnapping relate to this topic? And you explained that, so let me rebut how you explain that. I'm sure in a kidnap situation, a child would suffer so much trauma that they would fail to remember a fairy tale story that they watched or read for 2 hours tops. Come on, trauma causes the quintessential reaction, sweating, brain fog, and a generalized disconnect in the brain as a coping mechanism. That is, if the child is even aware that they're being kidnapped, which in most cases they might not be if they're being kidnapped by a family member. In the real world, fairy tales don't exist. So are you agreeing with our statement that in the into-reality world, children's perceptions don't include an effect from fairy tales? If you don't have parents, would a child even remember what Christmas was, or even know what Christmas was? Can you provide a source? So it was said that children associate Russian winters with Jack Frost. Can you provide a source that states all children compare Russian winters to Jack Frost? Because personally, I've never watched or read a story about Jack Frost. When you realized you didn't have ice powers, as you said in a personal anecdote, wasn't that a realization that the fairy tale watched didn't affect your perception of reality? Life isn't a fairy tale. Well, we agree. That's why we're here. Were these people that you quoted people like Prince Charming, people from fictional stories, or adults? Were they children? Were they adults? If they were not children, then by all means, let's all agree that that adults have their perception of reality changed. But that's not what we're debating now today, is it? When looking at women's rights and equality movements in recent years, do you really think that women are thinking that they are lesser than men? In the past, maybe, but not now, and definitely not because of fairy tales. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Brooke, for that closing speech from Blyth, Burlington. I would like now to thank everyone in this debate. It has been very clear that you have taken a lot of care and effort to make those interesting speeches. As I mentioned to you all at the start of the debate, we are not in a competition with winners and losers. However, we would like to provide you with some feedback from our juries. With this in mind, I would like to introduce our juries coming from both schools, who are going to talk about what they have enjoyed and what the debate has been mentioning. Now, can I please introduce you Miss Lana De Beer from Head of History from Nobel Algarve and Miss Anna from Blyth, Burlington.
All right. Hi, everybody. You guys all did incredibly. Honestly, I haven't seen this conviction in a very long time. And I really think this topic was very, very interesting. And it was exactly what we're interested in today. And you managed to make it your own and informative, which was crazy amazing. All right. So let's start off with Francisco. Well cut, clear. You've added some planning. Statistics, informative, logical argument. You had some scenarios there, which I liked. Perhaps you were a little bit quiet, but well done in general. Ria, very powerful introduction. I really enjoyed that. Your opening was thought-provoking. Clear voice, eye contact was great. You've got great public speaking skills, and you definitely knew what you were talking about. Very persuasive. Thank you. Sahar, great eye contact. He memorized the whole thing. The anecdote was charming. He had a humorous aspect to it, a very whimsical quality to it, and it was also mind-opening to that, very cultural. You had some quotes as well, which was good. Your rebuttal was very quick thinking, and I enjoyed that as well. Camilla, you had a very good, stable speed, which created a lot of impact, and it showed your confidence. And I especially enjoyed the tooth fairy rebuttal from that one. Olivia, I really enjoyed your argument. You had a clear voice. You were very strong about it, which means it shows how passionate you are about the issue. You drew in the audience in that sense, and you had some very good examples from modern fairy tales. All right, Brooke. Amazing. I've made quite a lot of notes on yours as well. So very informative. You had a very easy flowing manner. The only thing I could say perhaps is perhaps you went a little fast in some places, but you supported it well. You had a humorous, sardonic attitude to it, which annihilated our team in that sense. Well, I think you'd be amazing for Model UN next year. You should look into that. And your controversial comparison with the alcohol and that was also very unique as well to the argument. So thank you. That's all I have to say on this.
Thank you.
All right.
I basically think most everything has been said, but I did make a few notes. Why don't I go backwards just to be different? Brooke, you were particularly great at rebuttal. What you said was good, but the way you were able to take what people said and bounce it back and use it to say they basically argued your point, that was extremely strong. I really liked that. Olivia, I loved your discussion and your use of facts. There was passion. It was interesting. It caught my attention and it made me feel in support. The one thing I'd mention is that you want to always bring it back to fairy tales and how obviously that was based on fairy tales and people's perceptions of them. Camilla, you did a great job. You really spoke well, clearly, step by step, and a nice catch on the rebuttal. You had some good facts, clearly did a little looking up. That was great. I have a comment for both you and for Sahar, and that is be very careful with the use of terms. It's easy to use a word that you think means one thing and it means something almost the same. And that's not necessarily a criticism, just a way to be even better in the future. Sahar, again, same thing, just watch those words, but excellent use of rhetorical questions and great speed on the rebuttal, nice on the ball work there. I noticed how you were using examples, how you tied in multiple cultures. That was really great, just to see that you were able to speak outside of just our culture and into a more global perspective, which, given that we're in Globeducate, makes a lot of sense. Ria, your presentation was excellent. You had a very strong opening. Your intro caught my attention. I really liked it. And your arguments were very logical and in great procession. The one thing that I would mention is, remember, you spoke after somebody else. It would have been good if you had just said something about what Francesco had started out with, because a rebuttal is always nice to say. Francesco, you had a great beginning. You set everything up. You talked about the topic in a good way, and you introduced your main argument. Two things that some people don't think about. One, I would recommend starting with a way to draw us in, a funny story, random anecdote. You had those, but I would suggest starting with that, just to start things off with a bang. And the other thing is, remember, as the first speaker for the pro side, you get to set context. For example, I noticed the Blyth Burlington often used the whole adults may be affected, but children not. You could have just with one line undermined that argument by saying, of course, while we're focusing on childhood, it's obvious that the perception of childhood lasts through one's entire life. Remember, the first speaker sets the framework of the debate, but excellent beginning in so many ways. So many great uses of facts, guys. Nice research. I really appreciate a well-researched debate, and that's what I got to see here. Good for you. Good for all of you.
So thank you very thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Lana De Beer, head of history here at Nobel Algarve, and Miss Anna from Blyth Burlington. For your school feedback. It is now time for me to close this wonderful debate, which everyone has participated and very inspiring. Thank you, debaters, and thank you, Nobel Algarve here, and thank you, Blyth Burlington.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you, everybody. Can I just say a few words to reiterate what Lana and Anna have both said? All the notes, I've literally, as you spoke, Lana and Anna, I thought, oh, that was what I was going to say. Oh, that was what I was going to say. So it's really lovely to have three perspectives listening on and really being able to understand what worked really well and what was really effective, and sort of top tips for you to consider next time. One thing that I did, that I noticed, our previous debate, just because of the way they structured it, the students stood up. And for some reason, and I guess that's how it would normally be, right? If you were in a formal situation. And I know you've got a couple more debates. So maybe think about if there would be opportunity for you to actually stand up, because I think it changes the way you stand, perhaps the way you project your voice, the way you make eye contact, because I think when you are trying to persuade somebody to get on board with what you're thinking, it definitely helps when you are looking them eyeball to eyeball. So it's like, get on my side. What I'm saying is the honest truth. Again, reiterating everything that Lana and Anna said, but Brooke, if you can offer some, workshops on your rebuttals and the style, that is a difficult thing to do on your feet. And I was watching you didn't have notes. You might have made some notes, but you made direct eye contact. And the way that point with the drug and alcohol analogy, and making that clever. So clever. I thought, oh gosh, I hadn't thought of that one. I might have to use that one. But rebuttals in general, with everybody who did rebut, it's a difficult thing to do, to improvise, to think on your feet when you've got a speech planned, where you've got so many things and ideas in your head, to be able to articulate that in a way that makes sense and to really use the content of what the other speakers have spoken about really clear. Just a couple of things that no one's mentioned that I thought would be good for you to think about. That notion of we, some of you, I think we as a team, our position is, that's a strong thing to be able to communicate, because it really communicates unity. We are together as a team and we all believe in this stance, we all believe in this motion, and everything we are going to say is going to support each other as a team. That's really powerful. And also that sequencing, our first point, another point, who's going to talk about something else. As a listener, it cues me in, it makes me think, all right, I'm looking for this. I'm ready for this. This is what's going to happen next. So that's quite a good thing to do. And some of you, while statistics and facts were great, some of you did make just sweeping statements. And actually it would be useful to have, well, where did that idea or thought come from? Where's your reference point? If you're disputing that reference point, that's fine, but at least present it as a reference point to consider. But in general, you know, awe-inspiring and you know, phenomenal in your delivery, in your content, and in the wide range of persuasive devices that you all used collectively. I'm really looking forward to seeing your next debates. I'd just like to open the floor now. If anybody wants to make any comments about your experience or what you've learned from this today, I'll just, I'll mute myself, but you unmute yourself to share.
Well, this was my first debate here and I had a lot of fun. I was really excited for this, and I think we all did a really good job. So that was awesome. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, yeah, it was a great experience, and it's really cool to see everyone's ideas and to put them together and see what you can say and to debate it is really cool. So I had a fun time.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience, and I had a lot of fun. I'm sure everyone else did as well. And yeah, Sarah also wants to say something.
Hello, as you all know, I'm Sahar. This was my first time doing this and I had a lot of fun. Last year I was also here, but I was a researcher, so I didn't get to speak, but I had a lot of fun speaking today. Thank you.
Okay, well, if no one else has anything to say, thank you very much for participating. These events don't happen by themselves, so do thank your teachers, Anna and Lana. I think they have prepared you well, they have guided you well, they have made sure that organization was clear and that the time difference was accurate. So that's really, really important. So do make sure you thank your teachers, thank yourselves, give yourselves a big pat on the back and big, massive congratulations. Photos, if you just take some photos and send them to me, and if you've got any ideas on how we can improve this even further, do let your teachers know, because I'm always interested in student input and student voice, and we'll try and make that happen. But until then, I'm going to bid you a good afternoon or good morning wherever you are, and I'll hopefully see you again next year. Bye everyone.